the 5 ways I measure my fitness on a continuous, on a daily, on a weekly, monthly, and yearly basis. Now, you could also measure something in a decade, but for most people, the lifespan probably does not justify measuring every decade something. Now, on a continuous basis, I have 2 watches on me. These 2 watches are the Galaxy Watch 4. It does not make sense to upgrade it, I think, and the Garmin Fenix 7S Pro. So this measures a multitude of things. Now, there are also measurements that I can take on a basically custom basis whenever I want to take the measurement. But the things that are measured continuously are the pulse is measured continuously. Then there is also stress that is measured continuously, but that's not really a metric. It is rather a combination of, I think, multiple things. Now, on newer watches, such as the Galaxy Watch 6 and also the 5, I think you can measure skin temperature, but only, I think, during sleep and only if you have activated menstrual cycle, which in my case is not very useful. Now, there are lots of other things I also am able to measure on this. We could actually go through a couple of them. So we go through Samsung Health in this case, because that's the app that actually connects to this watch. So if we go on Samsung Health, then we can see that there are a multitude of things that can be tracked with Samsung Health and then also have a corresponding glance or whatever this is called in Samsung Health. Now, there are also a few things such as exercise you have to track on a by button press basis, basically. So now the first thing is steps. It continuously tracks the steps as long as you have it on. Now, it also can track your, not specifically your weight, because Samsung does not make a watch, not a watch but a scale, but what it can do is measure your body composition. So currently I've been trying this, and every time I go on my scale, it also measures body fat, but I then don't have the absolute amount of muscle in terms of kilograms, which you are seeing as the blue value here, the 37.8 kilograms. And so you measure it basically by getting 2 fingers on these 2 buttons here, which then closes the loop or the circuit, and it sends a current through basically your arms, which also might mean that if you store lots of body fat in your legs, then it might not be able to calculate this properly. I have my doubts about this technology, but nonetheless, I'm using it because I don't have anything else. Now, it also allows you to measure blood pressure. I do use an external blood pressure cuff, but this is done already the daily measurements. You can also measure blood pressure on the watch itself. And on the watch itself, it also should appear, I think, in Samsung Health, but I did not recently see these measurements. Now, you can also input at least glucose measurements, and there probably are services that are able to sync to Samsung Health or also to Google Fit. In the case of Garmin, there seems to be none such metric, and Garmin obviously is then the second thing we take a look at. Then there is also your sleep. It also tracks your sleep. In my case, I got a 90 sleep score, which is nice, I think. And then it also tracks here your pulse, your oxygen saturation. It is also able to continuously track. And you could also input your calories, or rather synchronize them. So you can either input them in Samsung Health, or you can also track your calories. Now, the calories I track also kind of on a daily basis, at least in the last couple of days. Before this, I did not track them. But I just want to see again, reevaluate a few of my decisions in terms of food, so I am trying to do this again. Now, these are the metrics that are displayed, and these are the metrics it tracks. Of course, it might do a few different things, and the newer ones would maybe have skin temperature as a metric. But now let's switch to Garmin. Now, of course, also the Galaxy Watch is able to track exercises, and during the exercise, it might then also track these data points. And also, of course, it then would track your GPS track outside, because it has GPS. It would also get things like your cadence and so on and so forth. Now, but these are exercise specific. I wanted to focus more on the general fitness, whatever general fitness is. Now we go into Garmin Connect, which is the name for Garmin's platform. Now, in Garmin's platform, you can nowadays customize. So this is already the beta for the new Garmin Connect. And here you have a couple of similar metrics, but also a few that are different. So these are all the metrics I choose to have displayed here. Currently, I do track my water, but this again is also not a daily basis, but much more a custom basis. So I track my water on my watch. There is a small glance on here, and then I just input whenever I drank 2 liters. And You also get VO2 max, for example, as a metric, which you don't get in Samsung Health, but you do get it, at least as I recently so the last time I tested this, I basically went on a run and I saw that VO2 max appeared in the exercise itself. So you click on exercises, and then in the exercise itself you have a VO2 max estimate. Whereas on Garmin, it gives it to you as a metric. You then also can access over time and see if there's a trend, for example. Now Garmin then also gets your pulse. It also gets your, in addition, so this is something this watch does not do, it gets your expiratory rate. So the number of exhales and inhales you do in a minute, for example, is something this watch can measure, whereas this watch cannot. Then we have load. Garmin does calculate the load, but this is more an accumulative calculated metric based on exercise, so post-exercise oxygen consumption mostly, I think. Then it also has the ability to display blood pressure. At least you can manually import it, but unless you use the Garmin the device, the blood pressure device Garmin makes, there is no way, I think, to synchronize this. I haven't found the way, at least not with my Omron Evolve, which I can synchronize to Samsung Health. Now, there is also HRV. HRV is now also just a metric Garmin displays that this device would be able to measure. So the Galaxy Watch 4, I think, is able to measure HRV, and you can also get HRV measured by installing an app called Veltory. And I actually do have this app on my home screen here. On here it says Veltory. So this is a shortcut to the app, and then you can actually go on to new reading, and then you can take a HRV reading, which then does not appear in Samsung Health, but rather in Veltory. So this takes a couple of seconds, not a couple of seconds, but rather close to a minute. There is something similar where you can take a custom, so whenever you need measurement of HRV, which is called the Health Snapshot on Garmin. Otherwise, Garmin only gets your HRV whenever you are sleeping, because then I think this is mostly due to the fact that your arm needs to be still. So if you are still for a certain period of time, because you are sitting down and you're doing nothing, or you're reading, for example, where your hands are mostly still, maybe not totally, but if you're reading with an e-reader and you only tap like this, then you might be able to measure it. But of course you have to manually measure it. So it would rather be maybe described as a manual measurement, not so much as a continuous or daily measurement, because, well, you have to take it by hand, or rather by choice, which manually, or the word manually also would include, I think. Now, you cannot really measure your weight. You can measure your weight with Garmin, but only if you get the Garmin scale. You can import your weight, so the only way I found to import the weight is by having my scale synchronizes to Samsung Health, which synchronizes to MyFitnessPal, which then doesn't synchronize to Garmin Connect, even though it connects to Garmin Connect. It only synchronizes to MyFitnessPal whenever I input a manual measurement. So once a week, because I don't want to do this every single day, I do basically input the same weight that already is in MyFitnessPal, that already was measured automatically and then synchronized automatically through these apps, and I input it to MyFitnessPal, which then once a week updates Garmin Connect and the weight in Garmin Connect. Now this, I think, is a certain problem, at least. Samsung Health does also get the weight, but it gets it from the scale, also gets the body fat from the scale. But then there is the problem that if you measure your body composition also on here, and now what I also have to mention is that my scale is not transferring, it's only transferring body fat and the weight itself. So the additional values you might get, visceral fat, how much of your skeletal muscle, or how much of your weight is skeletal muscle, and how much of your skeletal muscle. So there are two different muscle masses. The first one is your overall muscle mass, which also includes organs and other things, and the second one is the skeletal muscle mass. And these absolute values don't appear in Samsung Health. So I don't know if Samsung actually makes the scale, but Garmin does. So what I've been thinking about is getting the Garmin Index in order to have the Garmin Index. So the two Garmin devices are called Garmin Index BPM, blood pressure monitor, for having my blood pressure in here, which then also might be included in Garmin's Fitness Age, which is also some additional metric, basically a calculated or an algorithmic metric, you could say, because it's not based on physiology, rather it is more a combination of various things. And Garmin does provide the Fitness Age, so it seems to kind of go into this direction of basically viewing your health through the lens of how old you are, or biological age. And well, I've been thinking about gaining the scale in order to get my daily weight into Garmin, which then would give me basically one dashboard which I could access on my phone, but also on the web. What also has to be mentioned, I think, is that Samsung Health, for example, does not have a web platform. I think also Apple Health does not. So unless you wanna be connected to your phone all the time, I think it would be nicer if whenever I'm on my computer, for example, could take a look at these things. I still think it makes sense to have them available here, but maybe also available on your watch, because then I could reduce my phone need. Now, in addition, so you also see the heart rate. Garmin also calculates your resting heart rate and also gives it out as a separate metric, which you then also can access in reports. So online in Garmin Connect Web, you see basically reports, so you can give out things or trends over the last year. And this is also something that is specific to Garmin, which is something Samsung Health does totally lack. And then you have also calculated metrics like Hill score, like endurance score. You can also get your lactate threshold measured if you have an additional strap, but I don't have a strap at this point in time. So you would run basically a Garmin guided workout. I think it's a run mostly, and then it would give you your lactate threshold. It also gives out additional things like your average power during a run. And just metrics like these make Garmin, I think, more the professional athlete option, even though I mean, I try to work out, but I'm obviously not a professional athlete in the sense that I would be paid and this would be my job. Now, Garmin also has intensity minutes, which I think Samsung also has something similar to this. It also calculates floors, which you can also get calculated on the Galaxy or on the Samsung side. But I don't know if it shows you the floors actually, because I have not been using Samsung Health that much recently. And also it gets your sleep. Now, these are, I think, the main things. You can get HRV on a manual measurement basis, similar here, but not in Samsung Health, only if you have a third-party app, which is called Veltary. At this point in time, I don't know if there is another app. There is another app called Elite HRV, which I don't know if they have Android-based or Android Watch OS-based app, which would also then synchronize. Now, there are sometimes mistakes. So I open Veltary here and it says I should install the app again, and this happens every couple of days. Now, you can also get your calories into Garmin also with MyFitnessPal. So as I've been tracking at least some of these today and also yesterday, you then can get basically a weight management tool, which Samsung used to have, but now doesn't have any longer. So there was like a tool in Samsung Health a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, where you could enter, okay, I want to have this weight and this body fat percentage even, but body fat percentage is still now again. So they basically took away this one tool and then they rebuilt it with the body composition to a certain extent at least. And so you have basically this in red or green, whether you overate or you underate. So you can also get your active calories from both. Also from Google Fit, I think probably also from Apple Health and other fitness providers. You can get them into MyFitnessPal, and then also the data synchronizes. So I, for example, have a baseline of 2,000 calories because my metabolic rate is about 1.8. At least that is kind of consistent across multiple apps, such as my scale and so on and so forth. Then I have the activity calories, in this case 750 approximately, and then this is why I have the 2000 as baseline. Also, that's the standard recommendation, even though I might be a little bit taller than the standard human and also a little bit heavier compared to the standard human, which I think only weighs 72 kilograms or something like this. At least I looked this up, and probably due to multiple things. Now, back to the Garmin and this. So these are the main metrics I can get continuously tracked. Now, the daily metrics. And the daily metrics could also be metrics I decided to track on a manual basis. So, of course, now, everything that is not continuous is basically manual. And this could mean that you do drive somewhere and get your body fat measured with DEXA, for example. Or this could also mean that you have to measure your blood pressure by tapping a few things on your watch, or you measure your HRV on your watch. So, nighttime HRV is continuous on the Garmin, but is not continuous on the Galaxy. But what Samsung apparently does is it does get your HRV, it just outputs it in stress. So Garmin has HRV stress and normal stress, which probably confuses maybe people that just want to track their health a little bit, but Samsung maybe appeals to a broader market, probably by not giving you HRV specifically. So much about the continuous measurements. Now, all of the daily measurements and all of the rest of the measurements are things you do on a manual, and you could do potentially on a manual basis, but you probably couldn't get close to kind of a continuous measurement. Now, the question is also, what is a continuous measurement? If you go for a run, for example, it used to be, I think, that the Samsung only sampled your GPS location every 5 seconds, compared to Garmin, which I think took every 1 second a GPS sample, which meant that the Garmin was a little bit more accurate in terms of the GPS track. If you ran, for example, like this, and every 5 seconds, you basically then you only had these points. Now, if you hit these points and exactly hit it at the right point in time, then it would get the distance right. But if you don't, then it might get the distance a little bit off. So if you run like this and then you make a tangent like this, but it is within these 5 seconds intervals, then it might not get recorded. And so this probably leads to some errors, or to some distance that might not be recorded, or to some it is just a little bit less accurate in terms of what is probably tracked in terms of the track of a run, for example. Now, all of the daily measurements. The main thing, I think, that distinguishes these two type of scores. So the one score would be the score that is actually based on a metric, on a marker, such as pulse, and the other scores, the other category of scores would be scores that are calculated based on this set of metrics. One of these scores would be endurance score from Garmin, for example. Another score would be fitness age. Another score would be not hydration, but intensity minutes, for example. And your sleep score also, to a certain extent, probably based on not so much. So the sleep score is obviously something that is made up. So you could say made up metrics, and the rest that are actually somewhat based on reality. Now let's get to the daily measurements. And so I think the main constraint is here that you don't have time to measure all day. Now, it would be nice if you measured lots of things continuously, but for the things that cannot be measured continuously already, your glucose, for example, could be measured continuously, but it's very expensive at this point in time. You have to have either a medical reason for this, and then you get it for free from insurance, or you have to pay a little bit for this device still. I don't know. Also depends on the country and on the insurance situation, probably. So what I've decided, even though I have now all of these measurement devices, and I of course could take lots of fitness tests and could standardize my running and do always the same kind of test, and then have also this run as a test. Now, what I've landed on is that I take 2 measurements daily, and these measurements are blood pressure and my weight with body composition. I step once a day on the scale, and that's in the morning. I, for some time, I think also did morning and evening measurements with the scale, but I mean, at some point in time, you then cut down on all the things that take you time, and in order to basically free up time. And so I reduced it to stepping on the scale once and then measuring with my blood pressure cuff twice. Why twice? Because it needs 2 measurements in order to average then out the measurements. Peter Attia, for example, mentioned that you need at least 3 measurements on many devices. I don't know, the software tells me here to do 2 measurements, and so I just do 2 in the morning. Now, I did measure actually 2 in the evening, because the software would tell me to do 2 in the morning and in the evening. I did this for quite some time, but I then cut it out again, so I just measure 2 in the morning, because it takes a little bit of time for this device to go on, and we can actually press the button, and then it begins to pump, and then you also hear it probably, and then it goes off again. And you also need to have the app then open, because this only works with Bluetooth, not with Wi-Fi, such as the device from Garmin. The same is true for my scale, so this means that I have to have my phone open and the app open. So I have Bixby Routines, because this is a Samsung phone. Bixby Routines allows you to open certain programs at certain points of the day, so I could set a trigger, and I do have this trigger set up. If it's 6 or 6.5 or 6.10 in terms of the minutes, then this opens the scale app, which then, if I open my phone at this point in time, already has the scale app opened. I don't know if it then would already transfer, even if I don't unlock the phone at this specific time, but so much about the situation with the transfer. And then this synchronizes to Samsung, and then this also synchronizes to MyFitnessPal, and also to Google Fit, if you have this set up, so you can, with Health Connect, synchronize it to Google Fit, or also with a third-party app, which is called Health Sync, which allows you to sync fitness data between multiple platforms, at least on Android. So now the 2 daily measurements are weight and also blood pressure. I then currently take also the body composition, which I consider still to be kind of a weight measurement. But of course, this watch cannot measure your weight, so you need to input the weight from the scale. Now, there also might be an argument that if you have the watch on you, and this is also what I at least thought about, I want ideally a single dashboard where I would have all of these different metrics. And this might have been Samsung in the past, or this was Samsung for me in the past, and it's still, in terms of body composition, is not Garmin. So this is kind of an issue, and I have thought about maybe replacing my current scale and also replacing my current blood pressure cuff with the ones from Garmin, because in Health Sync, this app, you then could take Garmin as a source and I think synchronize to the other apps, but not the other way around. You cannot synchronize blood pressure as well as body composition, for example, to Garmin. You also cannot transfer, I don't know what I wanted to say, but yeah, well. So these are the 2 daily measurements. And then I do take measurements on a weekly basis. And why weekly? I have thought about these different patterns. So these are usually the heuristics in terms of time periods that humans use. Now, of course, also hours and minutes and maybe quarters of the day, but quarters and quarters of the year are less commonly used. So I decided to simplify my many decisions of frequency by just relying on these and just switching in between those. So if I don't measure something on a weekly basis, then maybe on a monthly basis. Now the problem I think with the monthly basis is that the month itself does not really repeat because the number of days changes. So then you would have the 1st of January, for example, where you took your yearly, I don't know, test. And the problem with this approach, I think, is that it is not consistent during the week. So during the week, the variance of weight might be higher compared to year from year. Now with weight, maybe it's not the case, but for example, my weight goes up and down throughout the week. My strength and cardiovascular performances also go up and down throughout the week, and maybe I didn't sleep the night before, and so on January 1st in the next year, if I actually went out on New Year's Eve and saw a few rockets in the sky, then if I take something that is based on performance and that also includes maybe my sleep performance, then this measurement might be off. So what I'm trying to say here is that the week is basically the largest unit which repeats. And also it is still, I think, small enough such that you can have some consistency. The month is not so much. So it would make more sense to measure every 8 weeks something compared to the 1st or the 15th of every month. And then you get into the granular detail, and then you have, not into the granular detail, you then have the option to have every 12 weeks, for example, something, or every quarter. The quarter then also might make sense, but then the 1st of the quarter, and then the 1st of the quarter might not always be a Monday. And because the weeks and the months are not synchronized, which is a system that is not really optimal in terms of doing things like this. So I don't measure things on a monthly basis because the month doesn't work for me. Of course it could work for me, and then you could take the problem then, I think, if you measure things on a monthly basis, such as, let's say, okay, ideally you take some things on a monthly basis. Like, for example, I could go to the gym and they have a bioimpedance scale that also has handles, compared to mine that only sends the current through basically the chain of my 2 legs. Now, because it has handles, it also can send a current through my upper body, and that measures basically the body composition of upper and lower body, at least a little bit more complete to the bioimpedance scale I have at home. So I actually went the last two monthly times, and I went to the gym on a Monday. I tried to have at least, so the rule I set up was that it would be the first Monday of a month. So this would be a somewhat reasonable rule that is still somewhat simplistic. But the problem is that then you have this appointment, and then it takes time away from whatever you would be doing otherwise. And so even though it would be interesting to have these reports, I think it's not really worth it. So I just reversed back to my scale. And so I did only in total 3 body composition reports at my gym. Because there is the appointment, you have to make the appointment, you also have to keep the appointment in mind, you also have to be there, and if you happen to do something else and train in the evening, for example, then it doesn't work because, well, and then you also have to keep other things constrained, such as not drinking before or drinking a similar amount of water before. If I stand up, then this is basically the most standardized thing I can do. And so I take my blood pressure right after I stand up. I take my weight almost, so 10 to 20 minutes after I wake up. I still don't drink anything. I still don't eat anything. And well, it's also true for these other measurements, which I also take then in the morning. So the yearly measurements would be, in my case, I don't have any yearly measurements apart from what I plan to do. And I have done the first session of this, or the first instance of this last December. So this would now be 3 months ago, where I took a first annual blood test that was not for any specific medical reason, just for me basically taking these values. This cost me 50, not 50, I think around 60 euros, with including the cost of blood draw, which I had at my doctor's office. Because I already was also at my doctor's office before, and also then my doctor mentioned that we could take a look at these values. So we did, but it would not, I think it would not necessarily be not that it's not useful if a doctor oversees this, but doctors also don't have too much time. So if I would take one every year, maybe I thought maybe I just take the blood markers and don't have an appointment every single year to discuss those. If they are not in the range, then maybe, but otherwise it would just be a standard measurement. I would add, so this would be on a yearly basis. Why the yearly basis? First of all, the time again with the monthly thing, also the cost of the monthly thing. Also, I want to maybe have more markers. So I think it would make sense more to have one yearly blood panel that includes more markers compared to a monthly one that would be fairly constrained in terms of the blood panels, because it can only cost so much. And so I mean, also 50 euros a month or 60 euros a month would be quite something. There are a few bloggers actually and YouTubers. I saw this on one video specifically. They take markers every single month, so it would be around a couple of $100 or euros to get these monthly, and also the time investment, and also then the question of scheduling and having the appointment. Now, in some countries you can get the phlebotomist to your home, which also might be something that would be reasonable, but also for most people probably not practical. So these are the things I take on a yearly basis. And why did I take the yearly things first? I actually could show you some of the yearly ones, and then we go to the weekly ones, which are then the measurement devices I have in this box here. And I don't actually have many more devices like this. Of course, you could take additional measurements, like doing these standardized stretching tests, and this would also be very interesting. The question is just, when do I do them? If I'm at the gym, then I usually work out. If I want to do weekly testing at the gym, then this would be an additional workout. Now the question is then, is this actually a workout where I get anything worked out, or is that a normal workout? And maybe I should add also the category of normal workouts to this, because I try to basically fuse them. If I, for example, measure all my 1 rep maxes on one day in the gym, then this day needs to be the day that is basically my peak performance during the week, or maybe it is not. If it is not because I worked out the day before, because I already have to work out, and then this would just be something on top because the workout itself does not basically trigger that much adaptation because it's a measurement, then the question is measurement and workout. It's basically exercise and performance. And I think it makes more sense to just have exercise sessions that are as standardized as possible, such that you can then compare them from week to week and don't have to have additional measurement exercises. Not measurement exercises, but also measurement exercise sessions. So what I wanted to show you is the app that I have used to input these blood markers. So I just uploaded my blood markers to this app, and this app is called Insight Tracker. It also gives out food recommendations, and it also gets a few fitness markers from Garmin, such as VO2 max, such as your resting heart rate, such as your sleep. And that's I think it for the most part. Maybe in the future, if Garmin ventures out into more different things, it might also include your blood pressure in maybe also their biological age. But Garmin also now has a fitness age, and I've reached the end of my plan in Insight Tracker. It says here at least. Okay, start fresh with a new plan. I don't know what I should do here. I just want to access these values. I also have a blood panel subscription for the remainings of the year running. Start with a fresh new plan. Start with your previous plan. I don't know. What should I click on? Create a new action plan. So it again gives me the same recommendations, I think. and then it crashes because on this app I have set the browser to something. So I still have the same goal, which is to reduce my biological age. It calls it here inside age. This is what the app looks when you try to open it, and then this is also what the app looks if you try to open it for the next 20 seconds. So this is not much happening here with this app. So in the meanwhile, while this opens, we could already begin the weekly measurements I now take. Now these are just the measurements that are not exercises, but I also have these exercises, or rather my workouts. So it at least says that it analyzes all of the different things it can analyze again. And of course, no, not of course, but there is this idea that if you make people wait for a certain amount of time while loading something like an app, as if it does some very immense calculations, that this increases customer satisfaction. I've heard this once. Now, if I open up the app, it probably analyzes all the data that there is, and then only after 20 seconds opens up the app for me. So now I do have, first of all, the results page, and you could also have these other things. So there are blood markers, there is activity, there is DNA, and there is inner age. So you can also get your inner age. This is just a calculation, but you need to buy this inner age. So my inner age in this case is 10 years higher than my chronological age, which is slightly suboptimal. Then I also have the sleep data from last night, which is not particularly great. And you also have your resting heart rate and your VO2 max, as well as the exercise the workouts show here. Now the blood markers look like this. This is the most recent view, or it's the show history view. You could also have it like this, where it doesn't show the trends, so it only shows these markers. Now the ones that are optimal are in the green, and the ones where you are in the normal clinical range are yellow. So the optimal range is a narrower range that basically would be more optimal. And you then also have the ability to upload DNA. If you can also make a DNA test with Inside Tracker, but I think only in the US. And that's mostly it about the app. It then gives out this action plan. So there are recommendations that are based on, so the first one is exercise. So there is this thing here, and it shows you the different recommendations you get. The first one is exercise, then you have nutrition, then you have supplements, and then you have lifestyle. Now, I actually did take all of the I didn't take any of the supplement recommendations because I didn't post the video because I just figured this might be an additional cost. I already have a couple of supplements such as creatine, such as turmeric, such as omega-3 fatty acids, which I already, and a multivitamin and mineral, which I take on a daily basis, and I didn't want to add anything to my supplement stack. Now, I took all of these recommendations in terms of food, and all of those that are in powder form available, so either spices or something else that would be in a powdered form, I did then combine it into the shake, and this is then one meal of the day, which I have. But of course, that's not like a full meal. It contains 4 tablespoons of flaxseed, 1 tablespoon of cocoa, then 1 gram of garlic, and that's mostly it, I think. That's already it. Now it also says I should have 2 tablespoons of olive oil in a given day, which I already have, but not specifically in a meal. Every time I make pancakes, basically, and I made lots of pancakes in the last couple of weeks. As I introduced or reintroduced carbs, I don't know if this was a conscious decision or not, or maybe I failed to analyze whether it was an intentional decision, but probably not. Probably I was just, I like pancakes, and so I made pancakes, and now it's a habit. Now, these are basically the yearly measurements, and I now have them. This is also available on the web, even though it doesn't synchronize, so it doesn't have everything synchronized in between us. Now, this is also, by the way, kind of a side project. What if I have an algorithmic meal at least once a day? And this is basically the second algorithmic meal, because Inside Tracker also recommends 2 servings of dairy. So the first shake I drink in a given day is usually 500 grams of curd, so the 1 serving of dairy with milk. And so I have this also in a shaker, and then I just drink this, and this, after the strength training, after resistance training, usually seems to then give me basically no hunger for the next couple of hours. Up until then, I then have something else, so usually then it's lunch. And so I figured that because there is not that much glycogen, or rather carbs, in this first shake, even though it has the milk sugar and the galactose, what I figured is that I might switch this for this shake, which has a little bit more carbs, I think. Or maybe I don't know which has more carbs. But what I figured is that I might try this on the cardiovascular days instead of skipping basically the curd shake. And I don't know specifically what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say here is that I have it in this box and then I have it already filled with water. Then I put it in and then I just shake it. Which also in terms of time, freeing up time is something I'm trying to do in order to free up time. So now the weekly measurements last and also then least, or maybe not least, are the remaining devices here. I take grip strength. This is a dynamometer I got. It sells on Amazon. You can also get it on platforms like AliExpress, and then it sells cheaper, I think. So you press this down, this lever, and then you get a grip strength measurement. You can also set multiple users, I think 5 or 6 with this device. It is not smart, it doesn't synchronize. So you have to have somewhere, either it's a piece of paper or it's an Excel spreadsheet. I use a previous gym tracker which is called Strong, and I input these values. Then the next thing is sublingual temperature. I used to track it with one app that was just for fever. This was just a kind of rudimentary app, also sometimes with ads, and I just input these values. I now found I am using another app which is called Bearable, and there you can also import manual. You can create manual data points, and one of these is sublingual temperature. I also take it once a week. It takes a couple of seconds, maybe 1 or 2 minutes. And sublingual means you put it under the tongue, and ideally to the back of the tongue, as I have read, otherwise the measurement might be off. Now, the next thing would be, I also weigh myself on this day, on the measurement day, and also I take my blood pressure on the measurement day. So these devices are also included. Additionally, I then take once a week my blood pressure, not my blood pressure, but my blood glucose in the morning with this glucose meter, which is made by company Contour Next. These cost quite a bit, so these stripes last me now, if I take this once a week, for a year, and this costs, I don't know what maybe 25 euros or something like this, but it was quite expensive for the fact that these are just a couple of stripes. And of course that's somehow how they make money, because they sell you this device once, and also they sell the Lancets, but I figured I just clean them with alcohol afterwards, and so I don't rebuy them and save money here thereby. Now you peek basically into your finger, and then the blood is drawn up by the thing that goes into this device, and then this measures your blood glucose, and specifically in my case the morning fasting blood glucose, which I then manually enter into Samsung Health in order to have it stored in one of the apps that I use for fitness tracking. Now the other app that it has, it synchronizes it automatically via Bluetooth. Then I got urine stripes a couple of years ago. This is also something they do at the doctor's office, and I think these are almost the exact same stripes they also use at the doctor's office. So if you happen to have your urine tested at the doctor's office, these are the ones I think are, at least they look very similar to the ones that I saw also at the doctor's office. And this measures a couple of things. All of the things that it measures is basically on here. It measures your glucose and your protein and your ketones. But there is this thing where I don't really know if all of the readings... So there is also an app. I found an app, not specifically from this company, but there is an app that says, okay, this company, if you show us this stripe and then you take 2 pictures, then maybe in the future you could automatically then have all of these metrics. So basically these are the different data points. So you have one marker, and this one marker then could be like this color or this color or this color or this color. And depending on what the color is, it has a certain range, as you see down here. And this might be useful, I figured, mostly because I cannot interpret this data very well. Also, I manually need to select the colors within the app, and so I every now and then forget it, mostly because I don't have time in the morning, and so I skip it and am under time pressure and say, okay, let's do this later, and then later is never. Then I also have a circumference measurement device where you can stick the end of this into this here, which allows you to then just pull on one end And of course, this does not work with your stomach, for example, but you then can take your upper arm measurement like this, and then, so there's also a spring-loaded, it's also spring-loaded, so you then can take this pin out, but because this device actually broke, I now cannot get the pin out any longer because I fixed it with tape. And so then you can read the measurement here, which is a little bit more efficient compared to having the actual measurement band or whatever it is called. And I track this in an app also. I think you can track at least some measurements in, not in Samsung, but you can track them in Google Fit, I think, and also in MyFitnessPal, but also not that many. MyFitnessPal would be the app I use for food tracking whenever I track my food, but often I don't. Usually I don't. I just make kind of recipes like this, and then to check what the micronutrients are of this. And also MyFitnessPal actually has a widget that allows you to see the calories on, and also to see the macros on your wrist, which I think is fairly nice. I then can check on the other wrist, because I have two watches, I can check my activity calories. So in this case I have from today's workout on the lower left, I have 339 activity calories. Because I have the baseline of 2000 calories a day, and I probably try to not change that in the future, because then I always know it's 2000 calories. I burn about 1.8 or 1.9 at base. So basically metabolic base rate is 1.8 or 1.9, which then means that almost, so if I walk a little bit, then it's 2000 basically, then I burn 2000 if I don't do any workout, and then basically whatever I work out, I can additionally eat. That was kind of the idea behind standardizing this. So on the one side, I can always see kind of how many calories I can additionally eat, and on the other side, I can then see if I track my calories, how many already are consumed, and also you get the ratio right. So you can input the ratio, let's say in my case, I put it actually just as a test to 50% of protein from the energy, and because fat is not quite, but twice as dense, about twice as dense as carbs and protein, I basically have a macro split of 50 to 40 is then fat, and 10% would be the carbs, but I usually eat more carbs because I cannot do low carb that well, it seems at least not on days on which I do cardiovascular type exercise. Now I have one last device, and this last device is an expiratory flow meter. This is made by a company called SmartOne, and maybe I should have mentioned the other companies as well, but they were not that important, and I did. So this is called the Omron Evolve, but well, it was the one cuff that had kind of this thing already built in, and it also was the one kind of smart cuff that also works with an app, at least from this company called Omron, that was recommended by Peter Attia on a podcast. So I bought this from this company, even though I might switch to the Garmin one just in order to have the data in Garmin, which then would mean that I have to sell this. Probably, at least I sell it after I am sure that the measurements are basically somewhat consistent with the new device, and so I would continue the old data set. Then this year you have to blow into this device, and it doesn't measure your blood alcohol, but rather how much flow you can generate. So basically the peak power of the flow that you output. It's called peak expiratory flow. It also gets another metric, and then this is also synchronizing to an app, and this app does not synchronize to the cloud, which means whenever you're switching phones, you can either transfer the data with, in my case, on Samsung, there is an app called SmartSwitch, I think, which then transfers the data from app to app, sometimes at least. And if you don't have this app, then you are without all of this data. So this is what the app looks. You can then press start. So the device itself doesn't have anything. You have to use the button here to start the test. You then do 3 tests. So you basically try to inhale as much air as possible, and then you blow into this device. And then you also can see your results. So on the left you see the peak flow, and on the right you see FEV1, which is a different kind of metric. The first one is, I think, liters per minute, and the second one is just the liters, and I think it's down to the second, or I don't exactly know. So that's all the weekly measurements I take. I have been thinking about reducing the weekly measurements because, I mean, ideally, I would not have a measurement day. The problem is also that I try to work out in the morning. So I stand up, then I take my blood pressure and my weight, and then I clean my apartment, and then I basically, if I have to go somewhere, then I pack my things, if there are things to pack, or I tidy up the apartment a little bit. And then, if I take all of these measurements, then I have an additional half an hour where I cannot really drink, because I have to still take my waistline measurement and also maybe my weight still, and also maybe my body composition if I then additionally take body composition on my watch, because I don't want to change the weight and also what my body basically looks like. I still want to have the morning state of my body. So until I have the circumference measurement, until I have the weight measurement, and also, so the blood pressure should be taken basically as close to sleep as possible. The blood glucose also should be taken as close to sleep as possible. If you walk around a bit, the blood glucose might, I think, already change, especially if you do like 25 push-ups already. For example, just as an example. Now this might not change that much if you don't do anything. The sublingual temperature, I don't know if it rises upon when you stand up. So it might be the morning temperature, but of course I cannot take all of these measurements at the same time, which would be nice, but then it would be continuous. But these measurements aren't continuous. Now it would also be nice and interesting to have continuous glucose monitoring at least for a couple of weeks, but I did not decide to get this because it seems too expensive, at least at this point in time. And if I just have a sample of 2 weeks, then I'd rather have it over a year and check if it is somewhat in the normal range, rather than 2 weeks and then I don't know anything for the rest. And well, so much about all of these measurements. And so, one last point not maybe, but here is the last point. The last point is that I try to standardize my exercises. So I basically have a whole body plan that I did in some variation of this form for the last couple of years, beginning from age 12. So I kind of made my plan, and the plan included switching from cardio to strength training, to cardio to strength training. And cardio in this case was mostly running, but everything else I did additionally. So I did cardiovascular running, but I also then did, if I swam, and I sometimes swam once a week, then I did this additionally to running or strength training. This also meant that I had a bi-weekly schedule, and this was also maybe not optimal in terms of comparing from week to week, and also in terms of progress. Well, so because I have the same workout 3 times a week, I can basically see what my weight and my reps are. I began tracking weight and reps as of a year ago, approximately, or 1.5 years ago, first with this app and now with my watch. So I can make these not scheduled, but I can make my workouts in Garmin. And then I can track them on the watch because I can send them to my watch. I mean, it would also be nice if they would synchronize automatically if you don't have to send them, but there seems to be some benefit also to this, as I have been recently thinking, because you don't want to have all the workouts you have in there synchronized to your watch, so you have to mark them. So you have to mark them either way, because otherwise you would have too many workouts on the watch because you only can select a few. Now, I also take this 1 rep max test with each gym every strength workout before. So there are 6 machines in my gym, and in order to have these calculated, and I also need the circumference measurements for the each gym biological age calculation, which is mostly fitness age, not so much other ages. Now, also Garmin has a fitness age, but it doesn't have a visual, at least as of now, in the kind of new app. It actually went up, so it was 18 for now a couple of weeks and months, and now my weight is upon the threshold where it then negatively impacts my ability apparently to achieve the biological age of 18. And of course now this is quite different from Inside Tracker, and this also shows that maybe if you have more data, there is actually more things you can find out, and then this might get more accurate. It would also be nice if Garmin, for example, decided to buy Inside Tracker and to integrate all of these things into Garmin itself, and then have one Garmin dashboard. And well, these are all the measurements I take on any basis, and that's it.